Okay, who are the most toxic champions in League of Legends? While League is a toxic game in general, some champions or champion mains are definitely worse than others when it comes to toxicity, and these are the champions that seem to always flame, troll, or run it down in every single game no matter what team they're on. And just for fun, we're also going to see who the friendliest champion and champion mains are. Don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy, and let's jump into things. Okay, starting off with the 10th most toxic champion in League, we have Vayne. Now, when it comes to squeezing into the top 10, I think there are honestly a handful of champions that could have easily made the cut, but even with that said, it really does make sense to see Vayne somewhere on this list. Not only is she known to be toxic in the game, but these days more and more people are also playing her in the top lane too, which is just a toxic move in itself. Ironically, these are also the same people that will still call your champion busted if you somehow manage to beat them in lane, but that's besides the point.
Oh, never mind. Why is there 4 people top? Where is my team?
Still, in my experience, Vayne players are either pretty chill or extremely toxic. It's usually one or the other, and I feel like a big part of that actually has to do with the Vayne's kit and the playstyle itself. Because she's such a hard scaling and late game champion, she also tends to get non-consensually railed a lot of the time in the early game, which ultimately leads to said Vayne player melting down or crying. These types of players are kind of like children too, because if you baby them enough through their inevitable tantrum in the early game, they'll eventually remember that they do have a scaling champion, and then they'll get happy again and start playing the game again. Anyways, moving on to number 9, to no surprise, we have Zed. Part of the reason I think Zed players are so toxic is because they have a bit too much main character energy in them. And by that, I mean they're just a bit too cocky for themselves. Okay, a lot too cocky for themselves. After all, if Zed players aren't 1v9ing the game with 50 kills, then there's a good chance that they're flaming their team instead. Especially if they end up losing lane, because if that happens, all hell kind of breaks loose. And even if they're winning, I feel like a lot of Zed players have an internal voice in them saying that they need to be the ones carrying the game. On top of that, their primary strategy in carrying the games is just to focus on getting as many kills as they can instead of playing with their team. So you can bet that they're always going to be going out of their way to kill the 0 and 10 ADC, even when it's absolutely pointless. Like, the amount of times I've seen one of these freaking kumquats dive a 0 and 10 ADC while having a 1k bounty and call it worth is kind of impressive. Plus, Zed is just an annoying champion in itself, and there's a reason he's the most banned champion in the game too, so it all checks out. Anyways, moving on to number 8, we have Twitch. I gotta be honest, I actually didn't picture Twitch being in the top 10, but I guess he literally has toxicity in his kit, so it makes sense, I suppose. There's also the fact that if you play a rat in the game, there's also a good chance you're one in real life, which obviously isn't true, but also kinda is. Others of you have also specified even further with Twitch, saying that Twitch ADCs aren't actually too toxic. They definitely have their moments, but when it comes to Twitch supports, that's an entirely different story, which I can honestly understand. If you get a Twitch as your support in the first place, especially as an ADC, it's a pretty good sign that no one's gonna have fun in that game. I feel like the best case scenario out of that is that he pops off, takes all the kills, and you turn into the ADC support. The worst case scenario is he becomes absolutely useless, starts stealing all the farm, and runs it down and starts crying about how trash his team is, which is probably the more likely case. Needless to say, Twitch mains are very hit or miss when it comes to toxicity. Coming in at number 7, we have Kassadin. Similar to Vayne, Kassadin is also one of the hardest scaling champions in the game, which means a lot of the time Kassadin players also like to speedrun inting in the early game. For some reason or another, even after hundreds of games they've probably played on their champion, they still don't quite understand that they are a late game champion. It's especially exciting having them on your team, constantly begging and pinging for help, acting like they're the only one in the game that matters, while also acting like they're the ones who didn't put their team behind in the first place, running it down 10 times already. Like, we get it, you scale, but there are also 4 other people in the game not inting who could potentially carry the game. On top of that, Kassadin players also have an unfortunate reputation for being racist, which, to be fair, I feel like a lot of that is driven from a very specific Kassadin content creator named Permaban, who definitely is racist and slightly psychopathic. Who knows, maybe it is just a Kassadin thing. Alright, moving on to number 6, we have the infamous Master Yi. I gotta admit, I feel like Yi is one of the champions on this list that actually isn't too toxic. I think for him, it's more people just straight up hate his guts as a champion. No one likes getting constantly rolled by just one Q ability. That said, Yi also falls into the same scaling trap as Vayne and Kassadin players, but this time it's from the jungle point of view, which is objectively even worse because if the jungler falls behind, everyone gets pissed. Still, Yi players aren't exactly known to be kind either, so they still have a pretty bad rep overall. Alright, now moving into the top 5, starting us off, we have Yone. I gotta say, I don't think anyone's really too surprised about this. After all, spoilers, his brother isn't exactly known to be the friendliest champion either. Still, Yone players do seem to have this very arrogant mindset to them, and to be fair, I kinda get it. After all, they are playing a champion who has some of the most broken abilities in the game, and they know it. I mean, this champion just seems like he's built to pop off and pick up all the kills. So if they don't end up doing that, then, well, they get mad. Playing a 0-kill Yone game just doesn't seem like a good time.
Ja, es war halt Botlane doof.
Also, a part of me just feels like they're so used to having an absolutely busted champion that if something doesn't go their way, then they end up throwing a tantrum too. It's like a spoiled rich kid who gets told no for the first time. Nevertheless, Yone is definitely an interesting champion to have in your game. Anyways, moving on to the number 4 spot, we have Captain Teemo himself. This might be a very hot take, but I will be the first to say I don't think Teemo players are actually very toxic in the game. Instead, I think they're just toxic for picking the champion in the first place and wanting to see the world burn. But when it comes to actually typing and raging, I don't think they're actually that bad. That said, I think that's honestly just because they can really let their champion do the talking for them. I mean, who needs to be toxic or troll in the game on purpose when both of these things are literally built into their kit already? Still, I can definitely see why Teemo is rated so high because, well, it's Teemo. All right, coming in at the number 3 spot, we have Shaco. I'm a firm believer that people who main this champion or thing are low-key psychopaths. After all, their kit literally revolves around deception, trolling, and feeding off the anger of other people. I mean, I feel like I'm not even exaggerating when I say a legitimate strategy when playing him is just to make the other team tilt as much as you can. And if that doesn't scream toxicity, I don't know what does. That said, it's not always great having him on your team either. First off, it's never guaranteed they'll pop off, and if they don't, they're pretty much absolutely useless. I swear Shaco players never know what to do when they're behind or in the late game. Also, speaking of which, I feel like all they ever focus on is just with people, getting kills, and dropping boxes. I also refuse to believe that Shaco mains have any idea on what the word macro means. On top of that, some champions just let the gameplay do the talking for them most of the time, like Teemo, but for some reason or another, Shaco players also like to type it up too. It's truly always a pleasure having one of these things in your game, and by pleasure, I mean it makes me want to kill my Coming in at number 2 in the second most toxic champion in League, we have Yasuo. I think a lot of people expected Yasuo to be number 1, which is fair. I mean, after all, I think he's still the poster child for toxicity in League. If you closed your eyes and someone asked you to think of a toxic champion, I'm pretty sure this dude would still pop up in most people's heads. Nevertheless, he is still easily one of the most toxic champions in League of Legends. Yasuo players are very similar to Zed mains in the sense that they just want to be the star of the show, and if they don't get that attention, then they will throw the biggest tantrum in the world.
It's actually fucking brain dead!
If they're not steamrolling their lane and picking up pentas, then they're definitely flaming their team or running it down. The 0 and 10 power spike meme didn't come from nothing. Not to mention that anything that comes from their mouth, or in this case keyboard, is usually toxic. I honestly can't remember the last time I saw a positive message being sent from a Yasuo player. The weird thing about Yasuo players too is it seems like even if they're doing good, they'll still find a way to be mad. Most of the time, it'll be them trying to 1v5 the other team only for them to die and call the rest of his team useless, even though they're the ones who have taken all the kills and also are ulting in on every single tornado they hit.
Kai'Sa ulted into back. What? Mo, man! Shut the f.
I mean, let's be honest, when's the last time you've seen a Yasuo player proudly get carried by their team? Truly deserving of at least the number 2 spot on this list. But finally, coming in at the number 1 spot in the most toxic champion in League of Legends, we have Draven. While I really do believe a lot of people expected Yasuo to be number 1, Draven players are kind of in a league of their own when it comes to straight toxicity in League. I mean, look at him. Even his video game character looks annoying. Out of all the champions, they probably say some of the most absurd, toxic, and unhinged things. I mean, have you ever actually gone over to their subreddit page before? Because I think that pretty much sums up all you really need to know about them. seriously, there's some really weird stuff over there. It also doesn't help, of course, that Tyler1 was the most popular Draven streamer back in the day, and that was when he wasn't reformed, which honestly kind of led to there being a cult of Draven wannabe players thinking it was cool and hip to try and be like him. So yeah, gameplay wise, he's also just a very aggressive champion in general, so I guess it's no surprise that players tend to lean the same way as well. And in their defense, his passive League of Draven literally forces his playstyle to be focused around being that guy and collecting as many kills as he can. And if someone steals the kill, like their support or honestly anyone, it just amplifies the hate in them even more. Either way, Draven players are definitely something and truly deserving of the most toxic champion in League. It was still pretty close though. All right, well, those are the most toxic champions of the game, but what about the friendliest champions? Well, really quick, I did a separate poll asking this question too, and here were the top 3. Coming in at number 3, and the 3rd friendliest champion in League, we have Ivern. To be honest, I had no idea who to expect to be in this spot, but I can see why the Friend of the Forest would be here. That said, it is kind of surprising to see a jungler this high, considering jungling is kind of a hard role not to be toxic in, or just not have people hate you in general. So Ivern players really do just seem to go with the flow with everything, so I guess it checks out. Admittedly, I also just picture a lot of Ivern mains being absolutely stoned out of their mind when playing, so I guess that probably helps too. But they are definitely pretty chill overall. Alright, moving on to the 2nd most friendly champion in League, we have Bard. I really didn't expect this at all, so I really don't know what to say here. It's not that I've had bad experiences with Bard, but it's more that they just don't really say anything most of the time. But maybe that's why they're so friendly. Either way, Bard is officially the 2nd friendliest champion in League, and by a fair margin too from the other champions as well. But finally, coming in at the number 1 spot, the friendliest champion in League of Legends is of course Braum. Let's be honest, I think we all saw this one coming. After all, the friendliness isn't just built into the player's mindset, but also the champions too. Which I gotta say, there's something to be said about people being drawn to the champions that they relate to the most, considering Draven players are considered the most toxic and Braum players are considered the most friendly. And it kind of makes sense because when you think about it, it would honestly feel weird or even slightly uncomfortable saying something toxic while playing Braum. It's just kind of the vibe of Braum, you know? Additionally, there's also the fact that Braum's kit in general is just so selfless that it almost forces anyone who plays him to be friendly. And it just makes it really hard to put yourself in situations where people would ever want to get mad at you in the first place. Nevertheless, he is definitely the friendliest champion in League of Legends. Really quick, here are the 4 results for both the most toxic champion and the friendliest champion in the game. And if you want to vote for the next Chosen by You episode where I'm trying to figure out which champion has the most carry potential in the entire game, aka which champion can carry the game the easiest, make sure to do so by using the link below in the description or in the pinned comment. Alright, anyways, thank you so much for watching. Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Alright guys, a massive shout out to all my patrons and supporters. I know I've been away for a hot second. I've been kind of dealing with some stuff, and even though some things have changed, a lot of you have continued to support me still, which is insane, and for that I still want to thank you all right now. So yeah, thank you guys. I seriously can't thank you enough, but yeah. Alright.